Okay, we are recording now. So welcome everyone to Feedback Friday number 27. 27. Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Here we are
Yes, it is.
27 times later. And this week we are going to be showing some amazing work from Emily Carris Duncan. But before we get started with Emily, I just wanted to give you the Botanical Colors intro. Talk a little bit about what we're doing. If those of you know, I have like this printed out script. It's called our run of show. And usually it's really, carefully highlighted. And so like, this is what it looks like today because there was no Amy to help me. So I'm just crossing stuff out and saying, oh no, we're going to use this person instead of that person. So as you all know, I'm Kathy Hattori, president of Botanical Colors. We run online natural dye supplies for artisans, and we also have a commercial dye house in Seattle. And so we are presenting today Emily Carris Duncan. Oh, but before I go there, I just wanted to introduce our guest moderator, Brees Honeycutt. Brees is going to be managing the chat. Brees, wave to everyone. So Brees is standing in for Amy. Brees, don't look so like, yeah, you're loving this, right, Brees?
I do. I'm admitting people,
Oh,
but
okay.
I have big shoes to fill. No way can I be
Yeah,
Amy.
I know. Like Amy is so like just articulate and can pick up on the moment. And like we're both, Brees and I are sort of like deer in headlights today, but we'll get through it. Anyway, so Brees is a New England artist who is actually in residence right now at Hancock Shaker Village. And those of you who follow her have seen some of the amazing and beautiful work she's done. Brees also did a presentation on making your own dye journal out of found papers and found items. It was one of our first Feedback Fridays. If you haven't had a chance to review that one and watch it, I would recommend it because just by using stuff around the house, you can actually make a little book, and it's enormously satisfying. But anyway, back to Emily. So Emily, I don't know, Emily, I sort of just met you because you came out to Seattle to study with me for a couple of days, and we really hit it off. We just learned how to do stuff like shibori and some natural dyeing and just kind of messing around for a few days, and she ended up with really beautiful results. But her artist statement says that much of my work is born out of for a search for self and a desire to heal historical wounds. As a trans racially adopted Black queer, non-binary person raised in modern America, my story is incomplete, riddled with holes, a result of malicious neglect and a casualty of power, supremacy, domination, and shame. I seek to unearth and preserve the untold stories of my ancestors while morphing the everyday objects that hold the traces of their pain and thereby my own. I've created pieces that interweave my experience as their descendant with their stories so often overlooked and untold. So, we're just going to kind of jump in, but I just wanted to let you guys know that this is a really, really super fascinating examination of kind of the objects of oppression and what Emily has done to illuminate them and really kind of change their power. So I'm super fascinated to hear what you have to say, Emily. I want to welcome you, and please go for it.
All right. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Brees, for holding everything down. I really appreciate it. And thank you all so much for your patience with my technical difficulties. It's wonderful to be here. So I'm Emily Carris Duncan. I am located in Philadelphia, and I am the co-founder of the Art Department, which is an interdisciplinary studio and community art space run out of my home with my husband. So yeah, I guess I'll, can we share the slides? Yeah, I guess I'm ready to jump in here.
Okay.
And just to let you all know, there is some like tough imagery in here.
Oops. Sorry. I'm going to escape that for a minute.
Oh, no worries. So I just want to just forewarn you that there are some tough images in here. So yeah. So this, I'm calling the slideshow Reclaimed. This body of work that we're going to most closely examine is called Reclaimed. I'm going to give you all kind of a start from my photography practice and into my dyeing practice, because they're all, at least in my mind, very interwoven. Okay, next slide. So my photography work started way back in high school, but when I was in college, I took some time off and lived in Maine for a while and really got more deeply steeped in it. And after that college experience, I got interested in understanding what kind of more about US history, more about photography history. And so I decided to pursue my master's in England. And when I was there, it was my first experience really, like, I had visited across oceans before, but I had never really, like, you know, lived across an ocean. So that experience really started to tie me more to the history of slavery in this country, and also, you know, certainly precipitated by England. So this project took me around to the ports where slave ships left from, and I created a series of seascapes using a large format camera and long shutter speeds to kind of create these like ghosty motions. Next slide, please. And while I was working on that, this sort of started me on this journey, this like elemental journey, where I started getting very interested in like what holds our history, especially with the history of slavery and not having a full tangible understanding, with a lot of that happening before the advent of photography. You know, we don't have a lot of these, we have objects, we have artifacts, we have kind of etchings, but we don't have a lot of photographic evidence. So I got interested in what are the objects that hold the history, and I got fascinated with the salt of the ocean being a piece that gets left behind. So I worked on this piece actually has come in a couple of phases. The underlying photograph was taken in 2002, and the salt was put over it in 2017. Next slide. So after my experience in grad school, I had a really hard time getting back into the studio and making work. I didn't make work for close to 7 years. It was a hard experience trying to understand like my place as an artist. And in that time, I opened the art department with my friend Kit. And we started out as a straight gallery space, and then we took up doing workshops, and a friend of ours asked to host a natural dyeing workshop. This was back in 2015. And all of a sudden, my whole world kind of got exploded wide open. So this is our friend Cindy Hernandez, who was teaching at that workshop and has taught a few workshops and taught me, honestly, much of what I know. Next slide. And the workshop started doing really well, and I started getting more interested in it, and also and there was one workshop where Sydney couldn't show, so I started just kind of leading them and learning as I went. Next slide. And what has been really interesting for me in this process, especially coming out of it as an educator, is that natural dyeing has such a educational lineage to it. It has such a folklore lineage to it. And it's been an amazing way for me to also connect further with the Black community and sharing, you know, some of our history and our ecological history with the ground that we walk on. It also, you know, in my art studies, I learned about Gee's Bend, and much of this textile work had started getting kind of like mushed in my brain, and I got very interested in creating my own quilts and revisiting quilting. I had tried it before, didn't have such a successful time. When I learned more about Gee's Bend and how they work, and the history that they come with, having been directly descendants of enslaved peoples, I just, you know, I kind of understood that is like my textile lineage. So I got to and get to work with that and move forward and have that deep spiritual connection to it. Next slide. So this is me with Miss China Petway. She's one of the G's Bend quilters and one of my teachers, and she's an incredible person and human. And if you don't know them, I'm sure many of you do, but if you don't, I highly recommend that you check them out. Next slide. So, and again, thinking about the elemental part of what holds history, what holds American history in these objects, learning more about the dye process and understanding iron's role in it, I got interested in decomposing a set of slave shackles. So I was able to find a pair on eBay and put them in a vinegar solution, and they sit in my studio slowly decomposing, and I use that in my dye process to sadden the colors and make them a little bit more richer, and also generally as a mordant. Next slide. And so in this work about slavery, I have become more interested in the examination of it, like how do you then heal these histories? How do you heal these deep cultural and personal wounds? So this is a picture of Peter Gordon. He was an enslaved African who escaped north and joined the Union Army after he had escaped a number of times and had gotten whipped a number of times. But after he had escaped the Union Army, his photograph was taken. And this is like a pretty famous photograph. It was published in Harper's. So actually, next slide, I think it shows. So with this work, I wanted to take this image and think about what it would be to actually heal his wounds. So I stitched into them using linen that was dyed with South Carolina indigo. And I'll probably talk more about that experience, but it was one of the most life-changing experiences ever. The spirits were definitely moving in that moment for sure. It was a really hard piece to make, but really crucial. And next slide. And after finding that work, I didn't know if there had been more images taken that were similar, but this image came across, a researcher brought this image to my attention after having seen the Gordon piece. And her name's Annie Cross, and she's been working on like Black photography and Black visual vernacular in the archive, and came across this picture of Martha Ann, who was beaten by her mistress. Next slide. And for the piece with Martha Ann, my intention there was to think about the dyes as actual like medicinal healing, and thinking about them for inflammation and that sort of thing. So with the piece that Martha Ann, that was dyed with madder root. And I also was really interested with the fact that Thomas Jefferson, I think I read this in, I can't remember which dye book, but that Thomas Jefferson was a big proponent of madder root, which I thought was really kind of an interesting connection there. So when this work is often displayed as a shrine to Black history, to American history. Next slide. And so Reclaimed is as a body of work, is kind of a piecemeal body of work where I just add different objects to it. This piece is called Thug. It was, made thinking about Michael Brown and hoodies, and how hoodies have become this flashpoint in our culture, and this fear point. And also how hoodies, at least for me in my life, are an absolute comfort point. Whenever I put one on and have my hood up and walking in the street, it's usually because I need kind of protection and armor and comfort. So in the history of Black history, and quilts made by enslaved people, a lot of that was centered around imbuing protection into these objects. So I wanted to think about how we can imbue protection and protect young Black men and young Black women and queer and trans folks in this piece in particular, I was thinking about my nephews in making this and protecting them. So the yellow pieces in here are actually fabric from the mid 1800s, and all of the blue pieces are indigo that I dyed. And then the black going along the top in that pattern, the flying geese pattern, that is made with, oh gosh, I can't remember which combination. It was the first black I ever made. I think it has kutch, indigo, and tannin, and some iron in there. Next slide. This piece was looking at protection for women. So I'm also a survivor of sexual assault. And so I wanted to, in processing through that, wanted to think about how might we protect, how might we add protection for women. So I did this, again, working with the improvisational quilting and the peace quilt, or the protection quilt, that I wanted to take that motif and put it into some underpants. So I dyed up, that also has in it tansy, rue, cinnamon, and I think safflower or saffron. So with this, I started to understand that, like, with natural dyes being the entire ecology, you could start making these thematic dye palettes. So I started doing that. So I wanted to look at women's health and decided to cross-reference the plants that have been traditionally used for women's health and sexual health for, sorry, excuse me, to need a water break. To cross-reference that and try to make a piece that way. And I've been really enjoying being able to make thematic quilts kind of and thematic dye palettes around specific pieces of history or specific subjects. Next piece. And on that note, this is kind of this is another piece that I did. This is actually a piece that was a gift to my husband. This is from the flowers from our engagement party. So I specifically chose flowers that I knew would die. So there's some eucalyptus in there, and sebum, and oh gosh, I can't remember all the things. Roses, I think some goldenrod in there too. Next piece. And then I also did the same. These were the flowers from our wedding. So for me, this actually is like, it has the extra added significance of the fact that we're an interracial couple. Next slide, please. Yeah, it has the extra, added significance for me, the fact that we're an interracial couple, which even still in 2020, still it seems like not an anomaly, but it's still not as common. So it's something that, like, we're aware of in our relationship and kind of examine, and I wanted to just make sure that we had that, preserved. So next slide. So back to the kind of looping back to the education piece. I've had a really amazing opportunity being able to take this work and teach particularly other Black folks, dying, because our craft history in the United States is still not as well known. It hasn't been as well preserved. Not that people are not out there doing the very important work of preserving it, but it just isn't really as mainstream and as preserved as it could be. And especially with things like natural dyeing, I think that's an art that's gotten really far away from our community. So it's been amazing being able to bring that to folks and teach. So this is my class at Penn, where I was working with Joanne Douglas, who's my creative partner, and Grace Sanders Johnson, my other creative partner, on a class about freedom and escape. So the students were likening their experiences with water and with the natural environment, and we used dye, indigo dye, to create a quilted sail that is going to eventually be put on a boat. So next slide. So this is a piece that Corey and I, my husband and I, made together, exploring our roots as a couple, as an interracial couple, and also his family has roots in the Confederacy. So it's something that, again, like, we we try to keep a dialogue about in our relationship, and kind of wondering where exactly our country is going, and you know, if these like white supremacist sentiments are kind of going by the wayside, as I hope they are. So, oh, and just to mention, this piece was made with Indigo and Madder Root as well. I work a lot with those materials. Next slide. And so this is a most recent piece I made during COVID. It says, America, Dear America, Stitch in Time, Save 9. This is currently on display through October 30th down on Fabric Row on 4th Street in Philadelphia. I started making the background just kind of apropos of nothing. It really was just a way for me to get my stress out and anxiety out during like the height of the pandemic. And then I was asked to participate in this exhibition that was looking at the history of Fabric Row and wanted to kind of add a message to it. So that's what I came up with. Okay, next slide. And then this is the most recent project that I've been able to embark on, was working with Bartram's Garden, which is a historic house down in South Philly here, and farm essentially. In their kitchen farm, they planted indigo earlier this year, and for whatever reason, it did not want to flower in 2020. So next slide. So while we were working with it, we were doing the salt rub technique, trying to coax out some of the blue. And while we were doing it, the blue refused to come out, and it only came to green, which has been an interesting thing. I'm curious to hear if anybody has any thoughts on that. It looks to be fugitive, but that was it was just a very fascinating experience, given everything that's been going on this year. Next slide. I think that might be the end of it. Oh no. Okay, so that's them hanging out. Yeah, I don't know what else to say, but I think that might be it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emily. That was fascinating. We are going to go ahead and open up chat. Brees, if you will do that. I'm sure there's tons of questions, so folks, go ahead and put your questions into chat and we'll ask. But to kind of kick it off, I have a couple of questions to do with, because I had seen those slave photographs before, right? And they're agonizing to look at. It actually was hard for me to look at them. And I really like the idea of you protecting them, because one of the things that we learned with some of the classes that Abu Bakr Fofana taught this summer was that indigo is considered protective, and that there are all these rituals in West African indigo practice where people are creating indigo garments in order to shield themselves. So it was really amazing that you also gravitated towards that, and also were using this indigenous indigo. And can you talk a little bit about the South Carolina indigo experience?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. That was one that kind of came, I don't know, it came out of nowhere. I was just Googling around to see if there was anybody growing it stateside, and then came across the history of indigo being a cash crop in South Carolina during enslavement. And I was able to, the woman's name is Caroline, and I cannot remember her last name, but she was working with the University of South Carolina, growing a new crop of it, and she had like one thing left and sent it to me. And it was, you know, and I'm sure folks have had, I don't know how spiritually connected to this process. Like for me, I'm not a churchgoer, but my spirit really is found in doing this work. And so there was a tangible difference, even in just like the texture of the dye bath when I was using the South Carolina indigo versus like any other that I had used. And it was a really moving experience, being able to use something that came from that that earth and that piece of land to protect, and also to have it, just the completeness of it, I guess, for me.
Yeah, yeah, very interesting. Because, most of the discussions about indigo in the South focus on really the plantation owner and never the kind of the knowledge base, or how exactly were they able to export so much indigo, like this young 16-year-old girl. Well, obviously it wasn't her, but, we have such an incomplete understanding that your mind immediately goes to that. So that's really cool that there's been numerous like people who have gone and found seed that has gone wild. And in fact, next week's speaker has done this and is growing indigo on John Island. So
Cool.
yeah, it'd be very exciting. So let's get to the questions. Breeze, anything that is coming up for Emily?
Well, it's
Oh,
interesting.
sorry, just real quick. I just want to jump in and say, the erasure of Black folks from that history hurts. Like, it
Yeah.
physically actually hurts. Every time I go through and start to read things and to find my folks not there, to find them unnamed and not there, it really hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And are you, I know I keep jumping in with questions. Are you looking to unearth, or literally unearth that history?
Yeah. I think this is going to be the lifelong mission for sure.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I'm very curious about it, what might be left of it. And because it's hard to say, but those things don't go preserved and they do go gone. So
Right.
to recover that history and to also be able to share it more.
Uh-huh.
That's definitely the goal.
Cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right, Brees.
So it's interesting, Kathy, that you brought up the healing properties of indigo when Abu Bakr talked about that. But Katie Smith asks if you, Emily, have about the quilting patterns. Are there any patterns that are associated with healing, like the flying geese pattern on the hoodie?
Oh, not that I found that are specifically associated with healing, but there are these like protection patterns, like the flying geese being representative of freedom, the log cabin being representative of like home and stability, kind of steering away from the drunkard's path. So there are these, there are definitely motifs in quilting that can be used symbolically together to kind of create. It's almost like words creating a sentence in a way.
It was a code, right? At times.
Yeah. During enslavement, along the Underground Railroad, they would use the quilts and read these symbols, and oftentimes it was black. If the color black was in the quilt, it meant that they had a vacancy.
Huh. Someone out related to quilting, someone wants to know, what are you working on now? Are you working on more quilts, or, I mean, I know you just finished working on that piece for the installation.
Yeah, so I actually have my crew here, my team, my art department crew team. We are working on a couple of large pieces for Expo Chicago, which is set to happen next year. I don't know if it's going to, in conjunction with Human Rights Watch, looking at sexual assault and rape, and looking to create a healing space with these quilts and that. Yeah.
So will it be a large scale installation?
It's not a huge installation. It'll be at the fair. I think the booth is like 20 by 20. On one side, it'll be an indigo quilt with stitching symbolizing the victims of rape and sexual assault, and then it moves into a middle piece that has an altar and on it, and then it moves into kind of a piece quilt that is on the other side of it, made of silk.
Ooh.
Cool.
I look forward to the photographs, or maybe even going. You never know.
Yeah, fingers crossed. We'll be like there in person, and things will feel normal.
Right. And on just a technical question, someone asked, are there any other books that you could recommend reading? Someone brought up Red, Black, and White Make Blue, but are
Yep.
there any other, I mean, you can share that now or we can put it in the chat for later.
I can send through a list. I do have a bunch of books, but just off the top of my head, I would look up, if you're interested in quilting, Questa Benberry has written a number of books. I think Maud Stonewall has one on quilting in the South. Just look up G's Bend, any of the books. Yeah, I have a few. I can send through a resource list, certainly.
Okay, thank you. And another question, someone was wondering if you had thought about merging photography and quilt making, using the two processes together.
Yeah, that's something that is rolling around in my head. I'm still trying to understand how that would work aesthetically. I think most of my work is very like project by project. I kind of just get a notion and go with it. So I'm waiting for that one to synthesize in my head, see where that goes.
I really appreciated your work, which is so researched, and then you have an intentional, and then the improv of it, which, you know, I guess what you're just saying is it rolls around in your head, and then all of a sudden it synthesizes to a piece. I mean, there's
yeah, it's kind of, I guess it's sort of a chemical process in there. Stick all the ingredients in there and it's like, oh.
Can you tell us more about being at Bartram's Garden?
Sure. So Bartram's, that kind of came out of nowhere. So my creative partner, Joanne Douglas, she works over there, and they have, you know, they've been doing a lot of growing and planting, especially over the last like few seasons, and really like building things out. And the natural dyes are a few folks on staff that are interested in it. So this year they just wanted to, as an experiment, see what it would be like growing it we're in Pennsylvania, so it's not the best climate for it, but they just kind of on a whim wanted to see how that would go. I don't know we just don't know what happened this year. We're still trying to figure it out. But they were in the ground early. We had a lot of hot days, but for whatever reason, they just did not want to flower this year. Yeah, so we're gonna, yeah.
I was gonna wonder if Kathy had any insights on why that indigo did that.
Do you know what variety it was? Was it Indigo ferritinctoria?
I think it was, yeah.
Because the leaves looked huge.
Yeah.
You know, they almost look like walnut leaves to me. And they had grown it before?
This was the first time. So I don't know if it was just like an acclimation thing.
Yeah, because it looked like it was ready, but you know, a lot of times if you will bruise a leaf, you'll see the blue develop.
Right.
And did you see that?
No, nothing came through. And we started crushing it up and everything. That's why I wanted to do the salt rub process, just to like really see if it was in there. And it started going green, and we're like, okay, this is good. And it's like kind of yellow. Okay, that's good. And then we're like waiting, and it just didn't.
Blow on it, right?
Yeah, we're like, it was like, no, it stayed green. And so the pieces I did, cotton and silk. And the silk pieces, the greens, it's definitely fugitive for sure. But the green is in there, and I was like, maybe if I put it in some alum, it'll stay a little.
Right. Yeah, I don't know. Although I do have a similar type of story where I've done it twice now, where I was just growing the Japanese, you know, the Persicaria indigo. And the first time I was going to take a workshop with a woman named Dorothy Miller, who was one of the first people to actually bring those indigo seeds to the States. Oh. So I cut it all and I put it in a paper shopping bag, and I ran over there because I knew it was kind of short-lived, and ran over there and showed it to her. And she looked in the bag and she looked at me and she said, "This is not indigo." So I'd actually pulled all the weeds that were around the indigo plants that I was growing and gave those to her. So not knowing, because I had no idea what it looked like, right? So then what I ended up doing was the next day is I pulled down everything else and took it in, and we were able to get a little color from it. But yeah, there, there's some, there were some identification issues at that time. So yeah, maybe find out what variety they grow next year and make sure it's not like a false indigo or, you know, an indigo variant that has really low indigo content, that it really is kind of one of the workhorse indigos.
Yeah, yeah, I think, yeah.
Right. Okay, good. Brees, any other questions?
Yes, Megan Kelly wants to ask, as you explore the folkloric aspects of dye, what does your research process look like for you? People, books, stories, or there?
All the things.
I know,
I
it's
don't
such a,
really, like, I tend not to describe, I mean, these days it's mostly like books and Google, but being able, the goal is to be able to get out and do more field research and uncover more stuff. Yeah.
I know you talked about it, but someone wants to know a little bit more about the journey from photography to dyeing, you know, like how you evolved that process.
Well, so fibers, I was an early fibers kid. Well, like 8 years old, I started like knitting and sewing and stuff. So I had some experience, but it wasn't a huge part of my life. And when I started the art department, my partner, Kit, at the time she's a knitter, and she was in knitting school. So when we were working on the art department, she got me totally back into knitting. And I don't really know where it all went. I got interested in yarn because we started selling yarn, and all of that research kind of got me into the like elemental bits of fiber, like the fiber part of the fiber. Mm-hmm. And I think honestly, a lot of it was like taking a break from photography gave me room to be able to pursue this other path, this other art.
It's a rabbit hole, isn't it? Once you get into fiber and dyeing, it just keeps going, really.
It is. And it also ticks some of the things I love about photography too. Like I do a lot of digital photography these days, but I grew up in the darkroom and I grew up mixing my own chemicals and all of that stuff too. So I think being able to like play kitchen chemist is really, really, really fun.
That's true. Someone has just a really question about the sail project. Like, how big is the boat that it'll be on, and where will it sail, and what is the message?
Oh gosh, yeah. So that project, it's still developing. We haven't decided how big the vessel is, but it's a full size sail. It's an 8-foot full size sail. It'll likely be in Philadelphia, probably on the Schuylkill. And yeah, that's all I can say about it for now.
Well, that's okay. Well.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, partly just because I can't totally reveal all of the things.
Of course, it's a work in progress, and there's nothing like actually dreaming up a project, making it, and then seeing it, right? So you have to save the surprise for when that boat hits the water, I think.
Yeah.
And someone else wanted to know, like, had you thought about using cyanotypes as for any of your work?
Yes, I have the goal again to build a darkroom, and that is something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I'm so curious about just learning more about the chemistry of cyanotypes and more about the chemistry of indigo. I'm fascinated by the two of them and would like to understand if they are at all related, other than the sun.
That's a good question. I have no experience in that. Kathy's shaking her head either. No.
Nope.
No. Wait a minute. Someone says gum prints can use any color to make photographs. Just FYI.
I did not know. Thank
you. And someone else wants to ask, can you talk about your quilting technique? Do you hand or machine, you know?
At this point, I machine quilt a lot of my stuff. I'm slowly moving into, I think I just want my processes to get even slower. So I want to move into hand quilting. I've been doing a lot of embroidering, which is getting me into that. I don't know if I'll get to hand piecing though. I don't know if I fully have the gumption for it.
I know I see quilters and I'm just amazed, the cutting and the piecing and the sewing. My grandmother was a quilter and those tiny stitches just bowl me over. Someone asked, have you explored African continent dyeing traditions?
I have explored them a bit. I've been doing some research here and having more of a difficult time finding the information I would like to find. So I think I'm gonna just have to take a trip.
Yeah, a research trip sounds like a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Is there anybody, we still have a little bit more time if anyone has a question that they haven't put into the chat yet. This is just a very technical question. How did you print the slave images on the linen?
So I have a friend who's a printer here, Katie Tackman. She does I think hers is an injection printer. She has a large format. I think it's a dye injection printer.
So I have just a question. I was looking at your website and looking at the current installation that you have down on Fabric Row. And I noticed that the pieces in the window and that there's a text panel, but I couldn't read the text panel. And I was wondering if, as this is like an artist to artist question, and I do a lot of research too, and sometimes all the work that one does doesn't land specifically in the work that can be read, right? Like, so that people know everything that you did. And I was wondering if you think about that when you make the work, you know, what, is there a takeaway or is there a moment when somebody really got it that was looking at the work and you were like, okay, that I did, you know, it worked. Is there, that rambling question makes any sense?
Oh yeah, it's, you know, because my work is so research heavy, like I also, as a viewer of art and as a young artist, I was always like, I want my work to like have all the information in there so it doesn't take like a dissertation to get to the point of it. Turns out that I'm a dissertation writer. That's what I do. So the issue of like my wall labels have become an interesting like focal point in displaying my work. So I try to put all the dye materials I use, all of the base and substrate materials I use, and any added history in the wall text so that people so the information at least is there. I also try to be around to tell people, to talk to people about the work too.
Right.
Did that answer your question, or did I get to it?
It did.
Okay.
And I think that piece is really intriguing because I'm sure it's on view 24 hours a day, right? People can walk by and see the work and they might not, or they might read the wall label. So I think it's a lovely way that people can enter the work, both through the stunning visual that it is, as well as all the history that makes the work. Yeah, I wish I was in Philadelphia to go see it.
Emily, I have a question.
Sure.
What is the reaction from your audience when you show them that mason jar with the shackle in it?
Sometimes that gets met with silence. Sometimes a lot of people are fascinated by it. Like the folks that are into that sort of thing are like, whoa, you know.
What do you mean by into that sort of thing?
Like folks that have come by the studio that are like archivists or artists themselves, or people that are just into like collecting and objects and that sort of thing are generally pretty fascinated by it. I think there's always a lot of horror about the fact that I could find those shackles on eBay.
Yeah, that is a little like surprising.
Yeah.
It's like sort of like, you know, World War II memorabilia, right? Kind of thing, but a lot worse. Yeah. It reminds me of a sculpture I saw, I think, at the De Young Museum in San Francisco, where it's an entire structure made out of the frames of automatic weapons. Yeah, It's super intense. And yours is so kind of offhandedly intense. I mean, was that kind of what you wanted as the impact piece?
Yeah,
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 that's
yeah. I
brilliant.
mean, there's definitely a flippancy to my work in some ways. Um,
Uh-huh.
I think because of the kind of like everydayness in some ways of the objects, like we still kind of live in our history. Like
Mm-hmm.
somebody had those like out in the garage in the back. I mean, I know my own family's archive like has pieces. I'm just like, why do we have things like that?
Yeah.
Why do we have these? What do we do with these things?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Super. Huh. Interesting. Okay. Any other questions, Brees? We have a couple more minutes.
We have a couple more minutes. Well, actually, that's the kind of that you're talking about, like why we have this thing. Someone wanted to know, like, so, like, where is there a way to donate or to respectfully, you know, they didn't say they have antique and wood darning tools, some blackface things. What should happen? And so, you know, like that's a huge question for you, but
That's a just big question for our culture. I mean, there's
right.
you know, like archivists that I talk to in like the conferences, you know, that I go to, like this is a huge question, like about the archive, and especially as we're rethinking and remaking and recontextualizing our history, this is a collective conversation that we need to have. How do we want to be able to visit these objects? Do we want to visit them? Is it important that we keep some of them, if not all of them? I mean, our country has a whole entire, like Washington, D.C., like at least underneath the Capitol is like full of our American archive.
Right.
So, you know, and then also your family archive. So there's questions about, I would actually throw that question back because I do get that sometimes, especially with folks that have like blackface things. What is your family relationship to it? What is as a piece of your family's archive? What are the stories related to that in your family?
Right. I mean, that's
Are they loved objects? If so, then what's that about?
right. I think that seems to me a way that we all need to be asking these questions. Like, yes, if that's in your archive, what do you, your family, now's the time to think about it and to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I don't know. I like to think that like neighborhoods should have some sort of archive. Did people see Baccarat, the movie? There's a scene in there where that town, the little town where it takes place, has this archive, this like museum, and it's all of like it's family objects, you know, from folks in the town. And I think that having spaces like that where we can really talk about the history, because to know that these objects, to throw them away kind of erases the fact that we had these objects in our homes.
Right. So, and someone wanted me to really reiterate that there's many comments, so you'll get to read the chat, but that everybody is like so thrilled with your work and, you know, so appreciative of what you've been doing. So please, there's an outcry to have you read through the chat after we're
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I appreciate y'all listening.
Yeah, I think what's special for me, Emily, is that you have this unflinching eye, but you also have this very gentle demeanor. So you're able to introduce us to stuff that would be really tough to look at or think about or examine. And it's much less, it's not that it's not confrontational, but it's not scary in that way, but it still is really impactful. So I really appreciate, I don't know if you've intentionally done that, but I just appreciate the way that you've helped us move a little bit closer.
Thank you. Thanks. It is an intention. It really is. I think a lot about trying to make things kind of aesthetically pleasing enough, but to bring, you know, a load of history to it.
Yeah. Yeah, excellent. All right. Are there any other questions for Emily? We got like one more minute and then we will unmute and everyone could
No, just a lot, no questions, but a lot of accolades.
Yeah, very much. All
And
right, so
So,
And
everyone.
Kathy, next week.
Oh, next week.
Yes.
Next week, Lee Magar is going to be joining us. So Emily was talking about the Indigo experience in South Carolina. Lee has been active in that movement to bring basically what's become naturalized indigo from some of the outer islands on the coast of Georgia, which used to be mostly Gullah people. And so there are some indigo plants there. They've been able to get the seeds. They've grown them out. Many people have worked on this. Donna Hardy from Sea Island Indigo, Lee Magar. There's a couple other folks whose names I don't know, and there's actually another organization. And they've all been active in indigo revitalization. Most of the people that I know of are really trying to incorporate community in this activity as well. So that's really nice. And Lee will be here next week to talk to us about that. So please join us. And Emily, again, thank you so much. We're going to go ahead and unmute and say goodbye, everyone. And thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. It's great.
Thank you, Emily. Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you. Excellent.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hi, Barb.
Hi.
Kat,
How are you?
bye.
Bye.
Barb.
Good. Taking care of the East Coast. Thanks, Breeze, too.
Hard to fill in for Amy.
Ah, Cece, there you are. Cece, you should meet Emily. Emily, this is Cecile Lewis. She's from Minnesota.
it's
I'm
nice
an
to meet
indigo
you.
dyer
She's
You
an
are-
indigo dye.
on YouTube and look at my videos I just did.
Oh,
It's
yes.
called Natural Dyes in the City. And I just did this within the last few days. I grow indigo too.
You do. Oh, I got to talk to you. That's awesome.
You got to talk to me. I got to talk
I
to you.
do.
Can't wait to meet Kathy.
Good.
Thank you. You make these things happen for us.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Cecile.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes,
by the
you
way,
do.
Kathy's the one that got me started years and years and years ago with indigo.
Yeah.
I'll never forget
We
that.
just started chatting on the phone and all of a sudden it just
I was complaining. I got bad indigo. Called Earth Hughes. Talked to Kathy. I've talked to her many times. But anyhow, I'm going to get with you. I'm going to find your website. We're going to talk, sis.
Oh.
Yes, I look forward to it. I look
Okay.
forward to it.
Thank you.
all right, you guys. Thank you. I'm so glad you guys connected. Excellent. Excellent.
In the recap, we'll have all the email information.
Yeah.
And Emily's Instagram, because people have asked for that as well in the chat.
Yep. All that'll be there. I'm doing it. So yes, ma'am.
This is Nan McCoy. I
Hi,
wondered if-
Nan.
Hi.